We're in the Gemara towards the bottom of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. We're holding where it says, Amalei. The Gemara here brought a braisa of a person that's going to be chayiv 5 malchus at once by cooking on Yontif. How is that? He cooked gidanosha with milk on Yontif and then he ate it. So he's chayiv for cooking on Yontif. He's chayiv for making a fire on Yontif. That's what it said, havara. Then he's chayiv for eating the gidanosha, and he's also chayiv for eating the basa b'cholov, and he's chayiv for cooking the basa b'cholov as well. So that's the 5 malchus. So the question the Gemara asked is, why is he chayiv for the havara? If you say the concept of hoyel, what does hoyel mean? Anytime I do a malacha that could be used for something permissible, then it's allowed. When a person cooks on Yontif, he doesn't need the food for himself. But hoyel mikli archim, maybe guest will arrive. So then I say that what you cooked is for the purpose of people eating, and it's allowed. So say the same thing over here. Even though you made the fire for Gid and Asha, which is not allowed, but that same fire could also be used for food that could be cooked. So why should you be chayiv for Havara? So the Gemara said, take out Havara, and instead, the Isser over here was that he brought wood that was muktzah. And the Gemara said that the Isser of using, hishtamshus, of using something which was muktzah, is asam and atayra, and there's a law for that. So here the Gemara is going to bring a braisa where you see that there's no muktzah and atayra. Amalei, so he answered back to him, I think this is Terabah, he said to him, Va'atu da'amrit, you are the one that told us. The question was asked of Rav Chista. Others say the question was asked from Rav Huna. If a lamb was brought out from the pasture, meaning this was a lamb that was not designated to be there as a carbon, so it was muktzah. Okay. Now you want to use it on Shabbos for a carbon. V'shachtoi tamid, or not on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. V'shachtoi tamid v'Yom Tov. And now you want to shecht it as a carbon tamid on Yom Tov. So could it be used as a carbon if it was muktzah? It wasn't designated b'chlal before Yom Tov to be as a carbon. Mahu. V'atamrit la nala, and you told us as follows. And here he brought a braisa, and at the end of this braisa, we'll see the answer to this question. If you could use an animal that was muktzah for a carbon. The braisa here is based on a pasuk in Yecheskel, and this pasuk in Yecheskel speaks about karbanas. It's actually speaking about karbanas that are going to be brought la'asad lavai. So in that pasuk, the full pasuk in Yecheskel over there, as you have here on the side of the Gemara, v'seh achas min atzoin min amasayim mimashke Yisrael. So from each word of this pasuk, the Gemara is going to darshan something regarding karbanas b'chlal, not only regarding la'asad lavai. Se, when it says a lamb, what does this exclude? V'loi habachayr. That what could you bring for a carbon tamid? It has to be a seh, which is not a b'chayr. And Rashi says the way you learn this out is a b'chayr is only a zachar, not an akeva. When it says seh, a lamb is a zachar or an akeva. So therefore we know that a b'chayr, which is in itself supposed to be brought as a carbon, cannot be used also to be a carbon tamid. Then it says achas, one lamb. What did you learn from the word achas? Another drasha. V'loi meiser. You can't use meiser behema for a carbon. Why not? So Rashi says that you learn it out from the word achas. Meiser behema is 1 from 10. So it's not just separate alone. You could only use for the carbon tamid an animal itself, not something that came from 10. Min atzain, pasuk says that you take it from sheep. So min, the word min from your sheep comes to exclude. V'loya palgus, not a palgus. What's a palgus? So Rashi says the first 12 months of the lamb, it's called a lamb. Then, after the 13th month, it's called a ram. When it matures, it's called a ram. The 13th month, there's 1 month in between where it's not a lamb and it's not a ram, but it's called a palgus. It's nishtahed and nishtahin. It's not this and not that. So therefore, that month, that at the age of the animal in that month, cannot be brought as a carbon. That's the palgus. So that's what we exclude. Then the pasuk says, min hamasayim, from 200. What does it mean from 200? So, it makes, what's the significance of the number of 200 that you should bring from 1 from 200? So we learn out, that you should take wine. We're talking now about the wine that's being brought for the Nesachim on the Mizbeach. So the wine is coming from a pit that contains the wine where there's 200 against the wine that fell into it. What are we talking about over here? We're talking about a mixture of something that was usser that fell into this pit. What fell into this pit? If you have wine that came from arla grapes, and that wine got mixed into a pit of wine, So if it's 200 times against that Arlo wine that fell into it, it'll be bottle. That's what Mina Masayim means. Even if you had wines that was mixed with Arlo that was Aser, as long as it's 200 times against it, it's bottle and you can bring it as a carbon. Then the pasuk says, Mimashke Yisrael. So this is the last thing we learn out. Mimashke Yisrael, from the beverage that Yidden are allowed to drink. Mina mutter Yisrael. You could only bring a carbon from something which is mutter for Yid to drink from it. From here we learn, you can't use wine that came from Tevel, which is from something that the Meisters was not taken from it. It's forbidden for you to drink, so you can't bring it as a Nesachim on the Mizbeach either. Okay, so that's the last limit of the pasuk. The Mefarshim actually discuss, why do you need a special limit for this? Isn't it a mitzvah haba ba'aveda? Okay, that's a discussion. The Shagasarya talks about this. But now the Bryce asks the question, Lo yachol lo yavi min amuktzeh. I would think, just like you can't bring from Tevel, so to on Yontif, you can't bring from an animal that was not designated as a carbon. It was muktzeh, it was out in the pasture, and now you want to bring it in to use it as a carbon. So Omrit, there's a distinction. You'll say as follows. Ma tevel miyuchad, just like the Braisa that mentioned tevel. What's unique about tevel? She issa gufay garamlay. There's an isser on this wine itself, that the meiser wasn't taken of it, so you're not allowed to eat it. Avkol she issa gufay garamlay. This that we're saying that you can't bring something on the mizbeach, it's only if there's an isser on the guf of it itself. Yatza muktzeh, this excludes muktzeh, she'ein issa gufay garamlay. There's no isser by muktzeh, there's no isser on the item itself, on the animal itself. What's the isser? The isser is that it wasn't designated. But there's no isser on the body, on the animal itself. Ella isser davacha garamlay. The fact that it's yontif and you didn't designate it for a carbon and it's muktzeh, that's the isser and therefore you can't bring it. Okay, so this is what this Braisa is saying over here. And this was the response that you could bring for a carbon from something which was muktzeh. So now the Gemara explains. If you're going to say that the isser of using something which is muktzeh is min atayre, mali yisa gufay, mali yisa davacher. What's the meaning of this distinction? Why should there be a difference if the isser of using this animal is the isser that's on the body of the animal itself or on the wine itself, or an isser that's happened because it's yontiv and it's muktzeh? It's both a isser min atayre to use. It's not mimashke Yisrael. It's not fit for you to use. What difference does it make if it's an isser in the item itself or an isser that comes from the time that you didn't designate it for yontif? Now the Gemara asks another question. How could you say that we're talking over here about a lav which would be muktzeh? Ha'atu da amrit, aren't you the one that said chiluk melachis l'shabes ve'ein chiluk melachis l'yomtiv? There is a distinction between one malacha, you separate, that is, one malacha from another malacha when it comes to Shabbos. What does this mean? What's the concept of chiluk malachas on Shabbos? If a person does two different malachas on Shabbos, you chayav a korban chatos for each one of them. Because we learn out from this machlekes from where we learn this out, but we learn it out that on Shabbos each malacha is like a separate isser altogether. But not by Yontif. Vein chiluk malachas liyontif. When it comes to Yontif, you don't separate between one malacha and another malacha. So therefore over here, why are you saying that the person is going to be chayiv for the bishul and also for the muktzeh, for using the muktzeh? Why is he chayiv for two separate malachas? It's Yontif. On Yontif, there's no chiluk malachas. Rashi explains when we're talking over here about chiluk malachas and Yontif, we're not talking about korban chatas. There is no korban chatas for being mechal Yontif. We're talking over here about the malchus. On Yontif, there's no chatos, there's no misa, it's just about the malchus. But there's no chiluk regarding the malchus either, because on Yontif, if a person is machal Yontif with any of the malachas, it's only one malchus. So why over here are we separating as two separate malachas? The Mefarshim asked a question that really this question the Gemara could have asked before, in the beginning, when it said that there's hav'ara and bishul. Right now we're thinking that it's muktzeh and bishul. What difference is it if it's hav'ara or bishul, or if it's muktzeh or bishul? In both cases, the Gemara could ask the same question, that by Yontif you shouldn't get two separate malchus, and if it's one, if it's all on Yontif, it's considered to be one Isser. But the Pnei Yeshua explains there's a difference. Hav'ara and bishul is happening at two separate times. You make the fire, that's one act, and then afterwards you use the fire to cook with it. So it's not happening at the same time. The muktzeh and the bishul is happening at the same time. Because the muktzeh we're talking about over here is not the moving it. I mentioned yesterday, we're not talking about muktzeh in the sense of moving the item. We're talking about using it. When is the use of the muktzeh? When it begins cooking. When the wood begins being used to cook. So that the muktzeh and the bishul is happening at the same second. So why are you getting two different malchus and if it's Yontif and there's no chiluk malachas? It's not Shabbos. So therefore the Gemara concludes, Ela apik havara v'ayel atzi ashere. Instead, we have to take out the lav of avara. That's not the additional lav, and it's also not muktzah. Muktzah is not min ha-Torah. Rather, the case over there was, why does he get a malchus for burning the atzi ashere? He's using the atzi ashere to cook with it. So you're using avodah zarah. You're not allowed to have anah from avodah zarah. V'azarah say the lav is mehacha v'layidbak b'yodcha me'uma min ha-chedim. You're not allowed to use anything from avodah zarah. No hana, you're not allowed to have any hana of it. So you're having hana from wood that comes from avodah zarah. That's the lav. So Ravacha Berei Rava says to Abaye, if that's the lav, the nilkinami, when it comes to this lav of using something from avodah zarah, there's another lav. Mishum leisavi soyeva el beisecha. Do not bring this disgusting thing into your house. So when your person has hana from avodah zarah, there's 2 lavin and you get malchus twice for that. So there should be 6 malchus in this brayso. This other issa here. So that can't be the case. Elo rather apik havara. Instead of the lav of avara, take that out, and what we're talking about over here is a person that uses wood from hektish. You're not allowed to destroy anything that belongs to hektish. This is besides the isser of me'ila, that you're not allowed to have any hana from anything that belongs to hektish. You're not allowed to break or destroy anything that belongs to hektish. Vazarase mehacha, and the lav is because it says va'asherei and tisrfum ba'esh. Avodah zarah should be burnt in fire. Lo yisas and kein l'shem l'keichem. You're not allowed to burn anything that belongs to hektish. And this is an issa, by the way, that applies even today as well when it comes to a beis haknesses, a beis hamedrash. There's all kinds of shilas when you get to when you break something in a shul in order to rebuild it. What's the heta for it? So Rashi over here says, I think Rashi says it over here, that it's derech hashchasa. When you burn something, when you destroy something with the intent to destroy it, so then there's an issa. But if it's being done in order to make it better, to fix it, so then it's allowed. Right, so over here, the additional lav is the fact that a person took the eitzim of hektish and he burnt it. He's destroying it because he wants to cook with it, but he's destroying something that would have been used in hektish. So that's the 5th lav over here, if it's not the lav of havara. Okay, now the Gemara comes back to the machlokes of hoyel. Okay, coming back to the main machlokes that this whole sugi began with between Rav Chisda and Rabba. Rav Chisda says that there's no such a concept as hoyel. And Rabbi says, yes, there is such a concept of hoyel, that since guests may show up, so therefore when you cooked on Yontav and you didn't need the food for yourself, nevertheless, because it could be used for the guests, so therefore there's no issa, there's no malchus in that. That's the machlokes here. So now the Gemara is going to go back to our Mishnah. In order to understand our Gemara, we have to remind ourselves what it spoke about in our Mishnah on Daf Mem Vav Amid Aleph going to Mem Vav Amid Beis. So over there in the Mishnah it spoke about a person that has a dough that's tamei and he wants to separate the challah on Pesach. There's a problem of separating that dough on Pesach. It's going to become chametz. What is he going to do with it? So Rabbi Eliezer says, first bake that is. First bake your challah or your matzah, and then after you bake it, then you separate the dough. Then you separate, it's not dough anymore, sorry. Then you separate the challah, that is. That was Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. What did Rabbi Yeshua hold? Rabbi Yeshua says, no, separate the challah first, and then you can go ahead and bake it. Okay, so now, l'chayda, that machlokes is there regarding baking. When do you bake it? Do you bake it before you separated the challah or after you separated the challah? That's also based on hoyel, as the Gemara is going to say. This argument between Rav Chisda and Rabbe, whether you apply the concept of hoyel when it comes to cooking on Yontif, when you're not going to eat it, it's just for guests. Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua. This seems to be a machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer Sava, Rabbi Eliezer, what does Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer says, do not separate your challah. Separate your challah afterwards. First bake it and then separate your challah. Rabbi Eliezer Sava, Amrin on hoyel. Rabbi Eliezer says, you say hoyel. So Rashi explains, what is the Gemara focusing on over here? The Gemara over here is focusing on, how are you allowed to bake this? When you're baking your challah, you didn't, your food, your bread, your matzah, you didn't separate challah yet. So if you didn't separate challah, one of the things that you're baking here is going to be challah. And if it's going to be challah, you won't be able to eat it. You're baking something that you're not allowed to eat. So how could you bake this if you didn't separate the challah yet? You should have to separate the challah first, and then that you don't bake because you can't eat it. And whatever else you're going to eat, that's what you bake. But if you're separating the challah afterwards, isn't there a problem? Elamai, the answer is Rabbi Eliezer holds hoyel. Rabbi Eliezer says that this person, every single piece of challah that he puts into the oven when he bakes it, so you could say, my challah is not going to be here, I could separate challah and something else. Hoyel, that he could separate challah, he could take off Rashi says, he could actually take off a small piece of challah of each of the matzahs that he puts into the oven. So there's not one matzah that's going to be challah, and each piece he says, I'm going to take off a small piece of this. So therefore, hoyel that he could separate it in that way, he's allowed to bake it even before he separated the challah. That's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rabbi Yeshua says, lo yamrin hoyel. We don't say the concept of hoyel. And therefore, if you're going to bake your matzah before you separate the challah, so that your matzah, one of them is challah. One of them is not fit for eating. So how are you allowed to bake this on Yontif? That's Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. So here we see the argument of hoyel regarding, are you allowed to bake it before you separated the challah? Rav Papa says Rav Papa notice no raya. Rav Papa is going to show in both extents, both according to Rabbi Eliezer and Rav Papa is going to show according to Rabbi Eliezer. Then the Gemara is going to bring another opinion that's going to show according to Rabbi Yeshua that it's not necessarily. The hoyel of the Mishnah is different than the argument of hoyel of Rabba and Rav Chisda. So Rav Papa v'dilme, maybe there's a difference. At kan lekam Rabbi Eliezer hasam. In our Mishnah, when Rabbi Eliezer applies the concept of hoyel, damrin on hoyel, over there we say hoyel, why? Elo, and the reason is as follows. When you're putting into your oven the matzahs, one matzah at a time, each matzah is fit for you to eat. Every matzah that you put into the oven, you say, this matzah is going to be mine. This matzah I'm going to eat. I'm going to take off a small part of it to be for challah. But otherwise, the rest of the challah, the rest of the matzah that is, I'm going to eat. So therefore, each one is fit for the person to eat. So therefore, I say the concept of hoyel. Even though, if he takes off the challah from one matzah, so then that one matzah he's not going to eat, but each individual matzah that he puts in, he can say that this matzah I'm going to eat. But over here, when we're talking about a person that's cooking on Yontif, and he doesn't need the food for himself at all, he ate already. He's just going to use it for guests. It's only fit for guests, but for you, it's not fit for eating at all. In such a case, maybe Rabbi Eliezer holds that you don't apply the rule of hoyel. Over here, for you, it's not fit at all. It's only for guests. By the matzah that you're baking and you didn't separate the challah yet, you could say by each matzah you put into the oven, I'm going to eat this matzah. I'm going to separate a small piece of it, but I'm going to eat this matzah. So over here, it's much easier to apply the concept of hoyel. So you can't prove anything from Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rav Sheshe Bered Ravidi says, I'll show you, according to Rabbi Yeshua, that maybe Rabbi Yeshua holds that dafka over there by the matzah, by baking the matzah before you take challah, over there there's a reason not to say hoyel. There's an opposite svara. Regarding the case of baking the matzah before you take challah. Over there you don't say hoyel. Why not? If you take off challah from one matzah, so there's going to be one matzah that nobody can eat. Not you, not guests. Nobody can eat that matzah. It's challah, and it's tameh. A kohen can't eat it either. Nobody can eat it. So therefore, over there, I can't say hoyel. Over here, when you're cooking, the food that you're cooking is food that's fit for eating. Somebody could eat it. You can't eat it, but guests could eat it. So I would say that over here, you do say hoyel. So therefore, we can't prove anything from the hoyel of our Mishnah. The hoyel of our Mishnah is a different story. There's actually a reason in the hoyel of our Mishnah to be more mekel, but there's also a svar in the hoyel of our Mishnah to be more machmer. It's not compared to the machlokes of Rabba and Rav Chisda regarding hoyel. This is the Gemara. Okay, let's see weiter. And Rashi points out over here something very important, but let's first see the next part of the Gemara. Amru Rabbanan Kamed Rab Yirmiyah Rab Zera. Now the Rabbanan said over this idea in front of Rab Yirmiyah and Rab Zera, meaning the connection of the machlokes of hoyel of Rabba and Rav Chisda, and the machlokes of hoyel in the opinions of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. So this was said over to Rab Yirmiyah and Rab Zera. Rab Yirmiyah kibla. Rab Yirmiyah accepted this pshat and said, yes, the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in the Mishnah is based on hoyel, like the machlokes of Rabba and Rav Chisda. Rab Zera like kibla. Rab Zera did not accept it. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rab Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rab Zera, Milsa the Kashilon va'asya kamashani. This machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah, that we had a difficulty explaining it for so many years. But my pliga Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, what are they arguing about? Hashtam Ruah Mishmei de Gavra Rabba. Now it was said in the name of Rami Bar Chama, in the name of a great person, that he explained this machlekes, that it's all based on the concept of hoyel. V'loine Kable, and we're not going to accept this. Why wouldn't you accept this pshat? Why don't you want to connect the machlekes of hoyel of Rabba and Rav Chisda to explain the machlekes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah? Amalei. So he answers him, Heichi Akabla. How could I accept this pshat? I'll bring you a braisa where I see that this is not the pshat of their machlekes. The Tanina, we learned in a braisa, Amalei Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, Lidvarecha, according to your opinion, that you're taking off the challah after you bake your matzah, you're going to be over on the lav of leisasa kamalacha because you're baking matzah, and a part of this matzah that you're baking is not fit for eating because you didn't take off your challah yet. So something is going to be chalier. So you're over on the malacha of leisasa kamalacha. This is the question that Rabbi Yeshua asked Rabbi Eliezer. And v'shasikli, we don't find in the Braisa that he answered him. He was quiet. Now v'i isa, if the pshat that Rami Bacham said that Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that you say hoyel, why was he quiet? Leimelei taimididi mishum hoyel. He should have told him, my reason is you're allowed to bake it, even though you didn't take off the challah yet. But there's a hoyel. He can take off a piece of challah from each matzah, and therefore the matzah that he's putting into the oven is fit for eating for him. So why didn't he give him this answer? So you see that that's not the reason of their machlokes. Amalei. So he answers back to him. Rabbi Yirmiyah tells Rab Zayda, no, the reason that he didn't answer him is not because he didn't accept it. The Braisa doesn't record his answer, but he did answer him. According to you, we learned also in a Braisa that Rabbi Eliezer asked Rabbi Yeshua a question, and we don't see in the Braisa that he answered him. What does it say in the Braisa? Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, Lid varecha, according to your opinion. What does Rabbi Yeshua say? You can't take off the challah after you bake it. You have to take off the challah before you bake it. According to your opinion, the issue is going to be bayirah by matzah. That challah that you take off before, you're not allowed to bake it. That challah is going to sit there on yontif, and you're going to be over bayirah by matzah. That was the question that Rabbi Eliezer asked Rabbi Yeshua. V'shasikle, and we don't see in the Braisa that Rabbi Yeshua answered him. So hachanami d'lo yahadale. So are you going to say that just like here in the Braisa Rabbi Yeshua didn't answer, does it mean that Rabbi Yeshua in fact did not answer? But ha kamahadale b'masnisen. If you go back to our Mishnah, in our Mishnah it does say that he did answer him. B'tnan, because in the Mishnah it says, what did Rabbi Yeshua say? Loi zehu chametz shem b'zharan alam shem bayirah bayamatzah. Rabbi Yeshua said, you're not even bayirah bayamatzah. Why not? Because there's no owner. Nobody owns this chametz. The Yisrael that just separated the challah doesn't own it because it belongs to a kayin, but there's no individual kayin that owns it either because it wasn't given yet to any kayin. So we see that Rabbi Yeshua did answer this, even though in the Braisa it doesn't say that he gave the answer, but in the Mishnah it says so. Elo shasek lebe Braisa. In the Braisa he didn't answer, but in Mahada lebe Masnisen, in the Mishnah it records his answer. Hochanami Eimer, I could tell you as well regarding the other Braisa where Rabbi Yeshua was asking Rabbi Eliezer a question that you're going to be over on Leisasa Kamalacha, and he didn't answer him in the Braisa. Eimer shasek lebe Masnita. In this Braisa he didn't answer him, but Bahada lebe Mechilta Achriti. In a different Braisa he did answer him. So, and what was the answer that he gave? Maybe the answer that he gave is that we rely on the concept of Hayil. So therefore Rabbi Yirmiyah says, I think it's a very good pshat to say that the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in the Mishnah is based on Hayil. Okay, that's the conclusion of this sugya. Rashi here points out that if you remember what we learned on the Gemara Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis, over there the Gemara also brought up the concept of Hayil regarding this machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, but in a different context. Over here, we're bringing up Hoyel regarding the issue of baking on Yontif. How could you bake matzah if the challah wasn't separated yet? Something that you're baking is also for you to eat. But the Gemara before brought up Hoyel in a different context. Regarding the bayirah bayamatzah. Is this challah that you separate yours or not? Over there the Gemara said that if you're going to say Hoyel v'yiboy itshel, the Gemara says when you separate challah, you could go and undo that challah. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says you could undo the challah, so in that sense it's still yours. Because the challah is not for sure challah, you could undo it.
Really?
Mashenkin,
You can undo it?
Yeah. Mashenkin Rabbi Yeshua says you can't undo the challah. Sorry, not that you can't, you could, but the fact that the hoyel that you could undo it doesn't matter. And therefore, it's not yours. So over there, the Gemara applied the concept of hoyel for something else. When you get to whether the ownership of this challah, to be over by Yirah, by Yamatzah or not. Our Gemara is not even addressing that. Our Gemara doesn't bring that up. Before the Gemara was discussing, could we compare the machlokes of Rabban and of Chisda to the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua? The Gemara is talking about the hoyel regarding how you're allowed to bake this on Yontif. You're being over on the issur of baking on Yontif. How about the hoyel that the Gemara brought up before, when you get to whether you own this chametz or not? So Rashi here says that either the Gemara over here has charata of that, or Rashi says we have to even change the gears in the Gemara before. And the point that Rashi's opinion on the Arsugi is that to apply the concept of hoyel regarding the ownership of the chametz, it doesn't make sense. If you're not an owner of something presently, just because you could go to a chacham and change your neder of the challah and gain ownership in it again, that doesn't define ownership now. That's not Mistava that's ownership. And Rashi says we had in Gemara in the first Perek where it talks about that you're not over on chametz that belongs to hektish. If you makdish your chametz, you're not over it anymore. If it belongs to hektish, there's no issue. And the Gemara they never brought up such a concept, but you could be shoyal on your neder and you could be kind of the hektish back to yourself. When it comes to ownership, it's Pashat, Rashi says, we don't apply the concept of hoyel. You're not the owner. When it comes to the Isser of cooking on Yontif, over there you could apply the concept of hoyel, that the food could be used. Over here, benegeh to challah, benegeh to guests, over there you apply hoyel. But hoyel, benegeh to chametz, Rashi says, we don't apply hoyel. Rather, what is the basis of the machlekes regarding the ownership of the chametz? So the Gemara said already before, the basis of the ownership is whether toivas hana is mamin or not. The fact that you could choose which kohen to give this challah to, does that have a monetary value and therefore you have an ownership or not? That's really what the machlekes is about. It's a different machlekes, nothing to do with hoyel. That's Rashi's pshat in this Gemara. Okay, the Gemara concludes now this inyan regarding who the halacha is like. Tanya, Rabbi Oima halacha Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi says we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yitzchak Oma halacha ki ben Beseida. Rabbi Yitzchak says that we paskin like ben Beseida. Okay, now the Gemara goes on to a different subject, a more simpler inyan here. It says the Gemara v'kama shir isa. How large is the size of a dough that you're allowed to bake on Pesach? If it's too large, so then it might become chametz. So there's a maximum amount of size of how large the dough could be. Rabbi Shmuel ben Yoshua, he says, b'chitin, when it comes to wheat, kabayin, it could only be 2 kav. When it comes to barley, which doesn't become chametz as quick, it could be shloishes kav, and it could be 3 kav. Rab Nosson, Rab Nat Mishum Rab Eliezer, chiluf advarim. It's in the reverse. Chitim becomes chametz quicker than saidim. That chitim, it could be, again, that chitim becomes chametz slower than sa'irim. Sa'irim becomes chametz quicker. So it's chitim, which is 3 kav, and sa'irim, which is 2 kav. Fragt the Gemara, but Vatanya, we learned in a different brayse. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yechanan ben Breika Omer, bechitin shloishes kavin. When it comes to chitin, it's going to be 3 kavin, and before we said that it's only 2. Or b'sa'irin arba kavin, and by sa'irin it's 4 kavin, and before we said it's only 3. Answers the Gemara like kashya. It depends what quality it is. When it says that it's you could use a larger amount, that's because we're talking about an inferior quality of wheat or barley, so it doesn't become chametz so quick. And when you're talking about good kernels that are ripened properly and it's good quality, that becomes chametz much quicker. So that's why there's a difference in the shiurim. Omer Rav Papa, so Rav Papa says, Shmami no, I can understand from this Gemara here, the shiurim that we just gave, Griyin chiti chasichasa, mechiti ma'al yiseh, the fact that inferior quality of wheat, so they are more inferior, so the inferiority of these chitin, of the wheat, from the good quality of chitin, tfei, it's more inferior, medigriyin siri chasichasa, mesiri ma'al yiseh. So when you compare the barley, good barley, to not good barley, so the difference between them is less than the difference between good wheat and not good wheat. And the Gemara explains how you see this. The ilo hasam, when it comes to the difference between the good quality wheat and the bad quality wheat, tilsa, the difference between them is 1/3 in the amount of dough that you're allowed to use. But for hacha, when it comes to the barley, riva, the difference between them is only 1/4. So it's less of a difference, right? The difference between 2 kav and 3 kav is 1/3. The difference between 3 kav and 4 kav is 1/4. So I see that the difference between the good quality barley and the not good quality barley is not as big as the difference between the good quality wheat and the not good quality wheat. Rav says a different share. So before we were saying 2 or 3 or 4, Rav says no. Kave mulugna lepischa. There's a kav from the city mulugna. That's the shear for how much you can, how large your dough could be on Pesach. And v'chein l'challah, that's the same shear also for the minimum size of dough for the shear to be chayiv in the mitzvah of challah. So the Gemara asks on this, how could you say that the minimum size of the shear of challah is a kav? Right now the Gemara is thinking, when Rav says kav and mulugna, it means a kav. How could you say the shear to be chayiv in challah is a kav? But we learned, Vatanya, chameshes revoim kemach, the shear to be chayav and challah is 5/4 of kav, which basically means a kav and a quarter. Kemach, that's how much flour you have to be chayav in the mitzvah of challah. V'oid chayavim sorry, the way you read this is chamisha revaim kemach v'oid, has to be 5 quarters of flour and a bit more. That's when you chayav and chala. Not if it's 1 kav. Rashi here brings the whole cheshbon. We once learned this in Eidevin, Daf Pei Gimel. The Gemara says there the whole cheshbon, how you come exactly to this conclusion. It's learned out from the what it says by the man. By the man, it says it has to be a siris ha'efa. So the shear of a siris ha'efa is a kav and a quarter and a little bit more. That's what you chayav and chala. So how can he say that it's 1 kav? And says the Gemara, hachikama kav melugnoi nami ahai shiurikoi. The kav of the city melugnoi, that was the shear. It was a kav and a bit more and another quarter. It's a larger size of a kav. Not sure. Maybe it's 5 pounds. I tried to check it up yesterday. I didn't get to it, but. Maybe it's 5 pounds of flour. There's a chart for this. I don't remember now what it is exactly. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Hani nashi didan. So our women today in our times, he says, Nog lemeifa kapiza lepischa. So they make smaller doughs to bake on Pesach, a kapiza. Rashi says they use a bowl that only has 3 lugin in it. That's less than a kav. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye says, "My daitech lechumra." They want to be more stringent, so they have smaller dough, so it won't become chametz. Chumra dasilu de kulahu. It's a stringency that leads to a leniency. The kamafkele machala. If you bake such small doughs, so it's not chayiv and chala, so they're not going to do the mitzvah of chala. Amalei, so you answer him, no, they will be able to fulfill the mitzvah of chala. The Avdan Rabbi Eliezer, they'll do like Rabbi Eliezer said. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer said, Hareide, when you remove the matzah or the challah from the oven, v'noisen l'sal, and you put it right away all into one basket, hasal mitzar from the challah. The fact that they're being put into one basket, that combines them for the shear of challah. Even if the dough itself did not have the shear, in the oven it did not have the shear, in the basket it has the shear, yichayim and challah. So that's when they give the challah. V'amar Rav Yudah Mashmuel. So Rav Yudah says in the name of Shmuel, halacha k'Rabbi Eliezer, and we pass like Rabbi Eliezer. Amalei, so I asked him, but for ha'itmar Allah, didn't we learn this? Amrei Bishua ben Levi, leishanu ele kikreis shel bavel shenoishchei zumizu. When is it going to be combined in the basket? That's only if you have like the breads that are baked in bavel, they're big round breads, and you put them into the oven, and they bite off of one another. In other words, they become attached. Then you chayiv. Avol ka'achin loy. But if it's made like narrow, long pieces of challah that don't touch one another, so then even if it's in one basket, you're not chayiv. So over here, when you have the matzah, if they're not touching each other, so you wouldn't be chayiv in challah. So the Gemara says, no, there's another opinion. Ha'etmar Allah Omer Rab Chanina said, afila ka'achin. When you combine them in the basket, even if they're long, narrow pieces of matzah or challah that don't bite off of another, it's still going to be chayiv. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, regarding this question of the basket combining it to be chayiv and challah, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question, Tavla she'ein lo levazvezin. What's if you have, it's not exactly a basket, but you sort of have a sheet where you put everything on of it. It doesn't have this rim, a vertical rim that's holding it inside of it. Mahu, what's the halacha? Toich keili b'inan, you have to have a interior that's holding it inside of it. V'haleka, and you don't have walls over here to this keili. Oidilma ave keili b'inan. V'ha'ike, it's all in the ear space of this one sheet that you place all your challah on of it, and it combines it together. Teiku, didn't answer this. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer says asal mitzarfan. The basket combines it for the mitzvah of challah. Rabbi Shua says not only the basket but also tana mitzarfan. Whatever you bake together in the oven combines it. Only if you have breads like in Bavel where they bite off another, then it's mitzaref. If they're not biting off one another, it's not going to be mitzaref. Zok the Mishnah. Why the bakeries today take off the challah afterwards? Yeah. Because the shear that they make of the matzah before is too small. That's why they take it off afterwards when it's combined in one basket. Yeah. Rabbi Gamliel says, Shalish nashim losheis ka'achas. 3 women could, if they have only one oven. So the issue over here is, if you can have 3 women that are baking their matzah all together using one oven, so they're not going to be able to do it quick enough to get it into the oven. They're going to have to wait for one another to use the oven. So the Gamliel says 3 women are allowed to use one oven and knead their challah all together. And they could bake their matzah in the oven one after the next, even though they're going to have to wait. But for 3 women, they're not going to have to wait long enough that it'll become chametz. That's the maximum amount of people. But more than that, they're going to have to wait too long. In other words, let's say we'll assume that it'll be more than 18 minutes. So 3 women are allowed. The Chachamim say, no, the way it has to be done is, Shalish Nashim Oiskais Bebatzik Ka'achas. All 3 of them could be busy with preparing their dough at the same time, but it has to be sort of in a rotation. they have to be doing it in a way that none of them should have to wait to put their matzah into the oven. Achas losha, one is kneading, va'achas reches, and one is preparing it, va'achas oife, and one is already baking in the oven. It's like the way it's done today in a matzah bakery. There's like this assembly line where it has to be done in a way where the matzah is constantly being worked with and it's not being left idle for one moment, and like this, they can get it into the oven without waiting. Rabbi Kiva says, and as the Gemara will see in the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva is responding to Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel said 3 women. Says Rabbi Kiva, Lo kol hanoshim v'lo kol ha'etzim v'lo kol hatanurim shavin. Why are you giving a shear that 3 women can use one oven? And then they're not going to have to wait too long. Depends what kind of women. Are they doing it quickly? Are they doing it slow? Is the wood in the oven baking very quickly? Or the heat of the oven? How could you say this shear of 3 people? It depends on a lot of different things here. And therefore he says, Zeh klal. This is the klal when you have a few people that are using one oven and they have to wait. So what do? Tafach, if you see it that if it's about to rise, tiltash b'tzainan. Put cold water on it, and then that will cause that it should not rise. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Braisa. The Braisa explains here the opinion of the Chachamim. Lasha, you have the first woman, so she starts kneading her challah, and when she's done with that, he mikatefes, so then she prepares it, so she rolls it and prepares it to go into the oven, and then the chaverta lasha, the second woman that's here in the assembly line, she will now begin kneading. Tachtel, instead of the first woman that was first kneading, and now mikatefes he oife, the woman that was preparing it before, and now she's already baking it, v'chaverta mikatefes. So then the second one will now go and prepare her chalat for the oven. Tachtel, instead of her. V'ashlisha is now a third woman comes along, and lasha, and she begins kneading. So you have this assembly line over here. When one is putting it in the oven, the other one is rolling the challah, the matzah, and the first one is kneading it. And the assembly line continues over here, as the Gemara explains, as the Braisa explains. Again, v'ashlishis lasha. Oifehi, when the first one is now baking, lasha, when she's done baking, she can go back to the beginning and now knead another dough. V'chaverta oifa, and the second one will now go and bake tachteh instead of her. V'ashlishis mekatefes, and the third one could now be preparing the dough, rolling the dough. The chazeres chalila, this is the rotation that it goes around. Each one should be doing another work in order that they shouldn't have to wait to put it into the oven. Calls man sha'oiskes bebotzik, as long as you're busy with the dough, you're not leaving it in one place. Ein aboli de chimutz, it does not become chametz. This is the most important thing to know regarding matzah in a bakery, that it should constantly be in mo. You should be working with it, using it, doing something with it. It doesn't become chametz. Rabbi Kiva says not all women are the same. Tanya Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva said, Danti lefnei Rabbi Gamliel. I asked Rabbi Gamliel the question. He gave the shiur of 3 women. Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us about this. Explain this to me. Who are you talking about? Benashim zirizais? Are you talking about women that are working swiftly? Or benashim she'ein zirizais? Or are you talking about women that are working slowly? Be'etzim lachem? Are you talking about wood that's moist and doesn't bake quickly? Or be'etzim yeveshim? Are you talking about wood that bakes very quickly? Be'taner cham? Is it a hot oven? Or be'taner tzainan? Or is there a cooler oven? So how can you give a shiur of 3 women? It depends on all of these factors. Amali, and he answered me, Ein lecha ela ma sheshonu chachamim. I'll give you this thing that Chachamim said, that if you have to wait for an oven, so zeh klal, in the matzah is starting to rise, what you do is, tafach, you see it's going to rise, tiltish b'tzainan, put cold water over it, and the coldness of the water will cause it not to become chametz. That's the klal for this inyan. Okay, well I guess we'll stop over here, we'll do the Mishnah tomorrow.